The lobby smelled like cold marble and other people's ambition. I was standing under the glass atrium of a tower on Westheimer Road, a $4.2 million lease agreement rolled under my arm like a diploma I'd earned twice, when my phone buzzed against my ribs. Isolde. I almost smiled. She called like clockwork, twice a week, always for something small. Dinner reservations, the dry cleaning, the particular silence that had been living in our marriage long enough that I'd stopped flinching at it. I stepped away from the elevator bank and answered the way I always did. "Hey, everything okay?" Her voice came back bright. Not happy bright, rehearsed bright, the kind of brightness a person builds in front of a mirror before they ever say the words out loud. "Raymond, I need you to know I filed for divorce today." Houston traffic hissed through the revolving doors behind me. I didn't move. I also signed a purchase agreement on the house. The buyer wants to close in 30 days. I've already started packing. I said nothing. I let her fill it. "I'm going to start over," she continued, "with someone who actually sees me. Someone who doesn't make me feel like a footnote in his own life." Then she laughed, not nervous, victorious, and I said the only two words in my head. The two words that would make everything after this possible. "Sounds good." Silence on her end. I think she'd been ready for tears. Maybe begging. "Not this." "Sounds good?" she repeated, like the phrase had teeth she hadn't noticed. "Yeah," I said. "I'll see you when I get back." I hung up, and I smiled, right there in a lobby full of strangers, because Isolde had just made the second biggest mistake of her life. The first one, she'd made 3 months earlier. She just didn't know yet that I'd been counting. Before I take you further into this, if you've ever had the floor disappear from under you and had to find your own way back to standing, hit subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And like this video if you believe quiet preparation beats loud threats every time. Now let me back up. Because none of this makes sense without Mesquite. My name is Raymond Caulfield. I'm 46, and for 17 years I've built a commercial real estate brokerage out of Dallas. The unglamorous kind. The kind where you're driving out to a warehouse in Grand Prairie before 6 in the morning to negotiate a lease with a manufacturing company nobody's ever heard of. Work that's invisible until you realize it's the whole skeleton of a city. I grew up east of Dallas, in a house where ambition wasn't discouraged exactly, it just wasn't a language anyone spoke fluently. My father spent 31 years hauling freight until his back gave out under him. My mother cleaned downtown offices before the sun came up. What they gave me wasn't money. It was something sturdier. When I graduated from UT Arlington with a real estate license and a truck that burned oil faster than gas, I told my father I was going to be the best commercial broker in North Texas. He didn't blink. He just nodded, like I told him the sky was blue. That kind of belief stays with a man. By the time I met Isolde, Caulfield Property Group had 12 agents and a name people in this business actually recognized. I wasn't rich in the loud sense. I was rich in the sense that mattered to me. I'd built something with my name bolted to the front of it. I met her at a charity auction for the Dallas Arboretum. She was 38, an interior designer with a small firm gaining altitude fast. Auburn hair, eyes the color of old copper, the kind of presence that made a room feel like it was quietly rearranging itself around her. We dated 14 months, married on a rooftop above the Dallas skyline with 60 people watching, her sister Phoebe crying so hard through the vows that Isolde started laughing mid-sentence, which made me love her so completely it embarrassed me a little. The first 4 years were good. Not performed good, real good. Her firm grew. My brokerage expanded into industrial and medical space. We bought a condo 14 floors up in Turtle Creek, floor-to-ceiling glass. The park spread out below us like something we'd been given rather than earned. We drove to Marfa one spring and did nothing for 3 days and called it the best trip of our lives. I want you to remember that version of us. Because it was true, it happened, and it's exactly what I was standing on the far side of, phone still warm in my hand, when I said those 2 words in a Houston lobby and meant every syllable of them. He arrived the way certain weather systems arrive, quietly, on a Tuesday, with no warning that anything was about to change. Isolde came home that evening lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months. Not about me, about a name, Tanner Holcomb, she said, setting her bag down like she was setting down good news. He's from Atlanta, his portfolio is unbelievable, Raymond, high-end residential, the kind of work that gets featured. He wants to bring his book of clients into the firm. This could double us in a year. I remember being genuinely happy for her. I want that on the record. Her business had been her second child for as long as I'd known her, and watching it grow had always felt like watching something I loved get exactly what it deserved. I met him 3 weeks later at a dinner party she threw in the condo, the kind with good wine and better lighting, where everyone stood a little too long near the windows because the skyline made good conversation for people who didn't have much to say to each other yet. Tanner Holcomb was tall, 40, hair going silver at the temples in a way that looked deliberate even though it probably wasn't. He wore a sport coat to a dinner party, not a suit, not a t-shirt, the exact temperature of effort that says I thought about this and I want you to notice that I didn't try too hard. He shook my hand like he'd been coached on it. Firm, brief, eye contact held 1 second past comfortable. Raymond, Isolde talks about you constantly, he said, and smiled in a way that made the sentence sound like a compliment instead of what it actually was. Which was nothing at all. I watched him work the room for the next 2 hours. He had a way of asking questions that made people feel like the most interesting person in Dallas. He knew which wine to pour without checking the label twice. When someone mentioned an architect, he had an opinion ready, delivered with the calm, unbothered certainty of a man who had never once considered the possibility that he might be wrong. I've spent 17 years reading people across negotiating tables. I know exactly what charm looks like when it's been built on purpose instead of grown by accident. Tanner's charm had a foundation under it. I just couldn't see yet what it was built to hold up. I didn't dislike him. That's the part one need you to understand. If I'd disliked him outright, this would be a simpler story. I would have said something, made a scene, and none of what came later would have happened the way it did. Instead, I told myself I was being the husband who doesn't trust easily. I told myself business partners get close. I told myself Isolde was allowed to be excited about something that wasn't me. Over the following months, I watched her studio visits turn into late studio nights. I watched client dinner become a phrase she said slightly too fast, like she'd practiced saying it in the car. I watched her phone find its way face down on tables more often than it used to. Small things, the kind of things that don't mean anything on their own and mean everything once you've collected enough of them. She started using words that weren't hers. Curated, intentional, words I'd only ever heard out of Tanner's mouth at that dinner party, now living comfortably in my wife's sentences like they'd always belonged there. I told myself it was influence. Professional osmosis. People pick up language from the people they work closely with. I'd done it myself with clients over the years. I kept telling myself that straight through the spring, through a summer that felt, in hindsight, like the last stretch of warm water before a drop-off you can't see from the surface. Then came a Tuesday in February, 7 months before Houston, when I came home early from a job that fell through and found my wife sitting perfectly still on our couch, her phone face down beside her like she'd set it there on purpose, her face doing something I'd never seen it do before. I didn't know yet what I'd walked into. I only knew that something in the room had already changed, and I'd been the last one to notice. A permit delay in Frisco is a small thing. A stapled form missing an inspector's signature. A build-out pushed back 2 weeks. The kind of setback that happens 40 times a year in this business and means nothing beyond an afternoon freed up unexpectedly. I remember thinking, on the drive back into Dallas, that I'd get home early enough to actually eat dinner at a table instead of over a laptop for once. I let myself in quietly out of habit, not stealth. The condo was still except for the low hum of the refrigerator and traffic bleeding faintly through the windows 14 floors down. And there was Isolde, on the couch, in the exact center of it, not reading, not watching anything, not doing the small motions people do even when they're resting. No scrolling thumb, no shifting legs. Just sitting. Her phone lay face down on the cushion beside her, screen against the fabric, the way you set something down when you don't want to see it light up in front of someone else. When she looked up at me, I watched her face do something I'd never once seen it do in 12 years of marriage. It wasn't surprise. Surprise is fast and then it's gone. This lingered, a half second where whatever she'd been sitting with hadn't finished leaving her expression yet, and underneath it, something scrambling to arrange itself into normal. "You're home early," she said, and the sentence came out a beat too quick, like she'd grabbed it off a shelf before she'd finished thinking. "Permit delay," I said. "What are you doing?" "Nothing. Just resting." She picked the phone up without looking at it, not reflexively. Not to check a notification, just to get it out of the room with her, and walked toward the bedroom. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after the door clicked shut, running my thumb along the edge of the counter, not thinking about anything specific. Just standing in the particular quiet a room gets when something in it has shifted and you don't yet have language for what. I want to be honest about something, because it matters for everything that came after. I am not a jealous man. I never have been. Jealousy is a reaction to imagined threats, and I don't deal in imagined anything. I deal in structures, in numbers, in the small tells that separate a good deal from one that's about to collapse under its own weight. 17 years of reading term sheets and reading faces across a negotiating table had given me one very specific skill, and it wasn't suspicion. It was pattern recognition, and what I'd just watched wasn't a woman resting. It was a woman caught mid-thought, closing a door on it fast, and doing a passable but imperfect job of covering the seam. I went to my office down the hall and sat at my desk without turning on the overhead light, just the desk lamp, throwing a small circle of gold onto a legal pad I didn't write anything on. Through the window, the Dallas skyline sat there indifferent and glittering, the way it always did, like nothing had happened, like nothing ever had to. I thought about the language she'd started using. Curated, intentional, words that weren't hers 8 months ago. I thought about client dinners that ran later than client dinners used to run. I thought about a phone that had started living face down more often than face up, a small habit that had crept in so gradually I'd never once flagged it until tonight, when I watched her set it down like it was something that could give her away. None of it, taken alone, was evidence of anything. I knew that. A good broker doesn't walk away from a deal because one number looks slightly off. He pulls the file and checks the foundation underneath the number. That's all this was, checking a foundation. I sat there until the traffic outside had thinned to almost nothing and the office towers across the skyline had gone from fully lit to that half-dark pattern buildings get at midnight. Some floors still burning for people working late, most gone dark for the night. Then I picked up my phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in over a year. Craig Bethel answered on the 4th ring, his voice rough with sleep he wasn't going to mention. Raymond, it's late. I know, I need something looked into. There was a pause on his end, not confusion, just the particular silence of a man doing quick math on what kind of call this was about to be. Business or personal? I looked out at the skyline a moment longer before I answered. Isolde, I said, I need a full picture. Where she's been going, who she's been seeing. I'm not asking you to assume anything. I'm asking you to find out what's true. Another pause, shorter this time. I can start Monday, Craig said. Give me 3 weeks. Take whatever time you need, I said. I'd rather have it right than fast. I hung up and sat there a while longer with the lamp still burning, the city outside doing what it always did, indifferent to the fact that somewhere inside one of its glass towers, a man had just quietly started building the case that would either prove him wrong or change the rest of his life. I didn't know yet which one it would be. I only knew I wasn't going to walk into it blind. Craig Bethel doesn't send updates. He sends silence, and then he sends everything at once. That's how the next 3 weeks went. No calls, no partial reports, nothing to check obsessively at midnight. I ran my brokerage during the day, closed a warehouse lease in Garland, walked a medical office built out in Las Colinas, and came home every night to a wife who had no idea her husband had quietly opened a file on her. I ate dinner across the table from her. I asked about her day. I meant it, mostly, which was its own strange kind of exhausting, caring about the small true things while a larger question sat unanswered in the back of my mind like a held breath. The email came on a Tuesday morning, plain subject line, no message body, just a PDF attachment and Craig's signature underneath it. I was at my desk. I closed my office door, something I almost never did, and told my assistant to hold my calls for the next hour. I want to tell you what it's like to open a file like that. Because it isn't like the movies make it look. There's no music, there's no dramatic reveal, it's just page after page of ordinary things stacked on top of each other until the ordinary things stop looking ordinary at all. Page 1 was dates, 5 months of them, going back further than I wanted to count. A hotel in Deep Ellum, a room booked under Tanner's name, check-in times that lined up with afternoons Isolde had told me she was at the studio, don't wait up. A bistro in the design district. A Saturday lunch reservation for 2, the same Saturday she'd told me she was meeting a client in Plano who, Craig had checked, didn't exist under that name in any client file her firm had on record. I kept reading. I didn't let myself feel anything yet. I've negotiated too many deals to know that the feeling comes after you've seen the whole picture, not while you're still assembling it. A wine bar on Henderson Avenue, a table for 2 under Tanner's name, seated at 7:42 p.m. on a Thursday. The same Thursday I'd been 40 minutes away in Irving. Buying a client dinner and a bottle of Cabernet neither of us finished because the deal closed early and we were celebrating. I remember that dinner. I remember coming home in a good mood. That was the part that sat heaviest. Not the affair itself. By page 3 I'd already made peace with what I was looking at. It was the specific cruelty of good timing. Every date on that list had a mirror image in my own calendar. some ordinary evening I'd spent thinking my life was exactly what it looked like. Then the file changed shape. Craig hadn't just tracked Isolde. He'd pulled a full background on Tanner Holcomb, and what came back wasn't a affair. It was a pattern with a name attached to 3 different cities. Nashville, 4 years ago. A woman named Delia Ashworth, a boutique event planner, had gone into business with a man matching Tanner's description under a slightly different spelling of his name. A police report had been filed and quietly closed for lack of evidence. 14 months after that, Delia's company had folded under debt she said she hadn't authorized. Phoenix, 2 years after Nashville. A civil suit, still open in Maricopa County Court, filed by a woman who'd run a home staging business. The complaint alleged Tanner had opened a shared account for operating expenses and drained it before disappearing to, the filing specifically noted, Atlanta. Atlanta, where he'd arrived with a portfolio and a story about high-end residential work, and walked straight into my wife's studio 8 months ago. I sat with that for a long time, not because I didn't understand it, I understood it immediately, the way you understand a bad contract the second you see the clause that's been buried on page 11. I sat with it because understanding it meant understanding something else, too. Isolde hadn't just been unfaithful, she'd been marked, selected. Somebody had looked at her business, her assets, her open, trusting nature, and decided she was the next city on a very old itinerary. And there, at the bottom of the file, the detail that turned my stomach in a way the affair itself hadn't managed to, a shared business account, opened 6 months ago, Isolde Vance Design and Tanner Holcomb Interiors, both names on the signature line. I closed the laptop. I sat in that quiet office with the door still shut, the Dallas skyline doing what it always did outside my window, entirely unbothered by the fact that the ground under my life had just been confirmed to be exactly as unstable as I'd feared. I thought about calling her. I thought about driving home right then, laying every page on the kitchen counter, and asking her to explain herself while I still had enough anger left to make the confrontation feel satisfying. I didn't do that, because a confrontation that night would have felt good for about 10 minutes, and it would have cost me everything I hadn't yet protected. Tanner Holcomb had done this before. He knew how to disappear clean. And if I tipped my hand before I understood exactly what he'd already touched, our shared accounts, that condo, whatever else was still exposed, I wouldn't just be losing a marriage. I'd be handing a predator a head start. So I put the laptop in a drawer, locked my office door behind me, and drove home to a wife who had no idea what I now knew. I said nothing that night. I asked about her day like I always did. I watched her set her phone face down on the counter, the habit I now understood completely, and I felt something in me go very quiet and very still, not numb, just settled. The way a man gets settled right before he starts building something that has to be built exactly right the first time. Clifton Hale's office was on the 17th floor of a building on Ross Avenue, and I started visiting it the way other men visit a gym, regularly, quietly, and without telling anyone in my life why. Is the condo in both names? He'd asked me that first week, and by the second week he already had a plan with more moving parts than most commercial deals I'd closed. Over the following 3 months, I did exactly what he told me, in exactly the order he told me to do it, because Clifton didn't believe in shortcuts and I didn't have the luxury of taking any. I moved my premarital savings, the money I'd built before I ever met Isolde, which under Texas law belonged to me alone, into a separate account, documented with bank statements going back years to prove its origin. I cleaned up the structure of my business income, made sure every dollar Caulfield Property Group generated had a clear line back to an LLC that had existed before our marriage did. I sat across from Clifton's paralegal for 2 full afternoons, going through 9 years of joint statements. Sorting what was mine, what was ours, and what needed a paper trail strong enough to survive a courtroom. And then there was the second conversation. The one about Tanner. He's done this before, Clifton said, sliding Craig's report back across his desk toward me. Nashville, Phoenix, now here. You need to understand, this isn't a man who's going to disappear quietly when your marriage ends. He's going to disappear the second he's extracted what he came for. The only question is whether Isolde's assets go with him. I remember sitting in that office, mid-afternoon light cutting across his desk, and asking the only question that actually mattered to me anymore. Can I stop it? Clifton looked at me for a long moment. You can't stop what she's already decided to do. You can only make sure it doesn't take you down with her. So I didn't stop it. I documented it. I watched it happen the way you watch weather roll in when you've already moved everything indoors. The hardest part wasn't the paperwork. It was going home every night after those meetings and sitting across from her at a table we'd bought together, asking about her day, meaning the question even though I already knew more about her day than she realized. "Studio's crazy right now," she told me one Tuesday, twirling pasta she barely touched. "Tanner and I are finalizing the Kessler project. It might run late this week." "That's great," I said, and I meant that too, in the strange, splintered way you can mean two contradictory things at once. Her business thriving, her business built on borrowed time. Both true. There was one night, close to the end of that second month, that still sits with me. I'd stepped out onto the balcony to take a call from Clifton. Something about the deed filing that couldn't wait until morning, and I'd forgotten to close the sliding door all the way behind me. I was 3 sentences into the conversation, my voice low, when I heard Isolde's footsteps behind me. "Who's that?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe, holding a glass of wine. I put my hand over the phone. "Clifton, lease dispute out in Frisco, that tenant who's been dragging his feet on the build-out." The lie came out smoother than it should have. 17 years of closing deals will do that to a man. Teach him to sound certain even when certainty is the last thing he's feeling. She studied me for a second longer than felt comfortable. Long enough that I genuinely didn't know which way it was going to break. "You work too much," she finally said, and went back inside. I stood on that balcony another minute after she'd gone, phone still pressed to my ear. Clifton asking if I was still there, and I remember thinking that I had come closer in that moment to losing everything I'd built over the last 3 months than at any point since I'd opened Craig's file. One more question, one glance at my call log. That's all it would have taken. It didn't happen, but I stopped taking calls on the balcony after that night. By the 3rd month, the fortress Clifton and I had built was close to finished. Every asset accounted for, every dollar traceable to its rightful owner. The only piece we hadn't touched, because there was nothing to touch, because it wasn't a mistake I could fix for her, was the Turtle Creek condo, still sitting there in both our names, the way it had for 9 years. That's the piece Isolde handled herself, without knowing what she was handling. I found out about it the way I found out about most things that fall. In the last few weeks, through Clifton, not through her. She'd found a buyer, a closing date 30 days out, and on a Thursday afternoon in October, while I was 4 hours away in Houston closing a lease of my own, Isolde Marie Caulfield sat down at our kitchen counter and signed a purchase agreement on a home she did not have the legal authority to sell without me. She had no idea, signing her name on that line, that she was signing something that would never hold up. She thought she was closing a door. She was actually handing me the last piece I needed to close mine. So there I was again, back where this story started. A glass tower on Westheimer Road, a $4.2 million lease agreement tucked under my arm, my phone buzzing in my pocket with a name I now understood completely. Isolde. I stepped away from the elevator bank the same way I always did, and answered the same way I always did. "Hey, everything okay?" Except this time, I already knew it wasn't a question with an innocent answer waiting behind it. I'd spent 3 months making sure of that. "Raymond," her voice had that brightness in it, the rehearsed kind, the kind you build in front of a mirror before you ever say the real words out loud. "I need you to know that I filed for divorce today. I also signed a purchase agreement on the house. The buyer wants to close in 30 days. I've already started packing my things." Houston traffic hissed behind me through the revolving doors. I let the silence sit there a moment, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted her to have the full experience of saying it to someone who wasn't going to flinch. "I'm going to start over," she continued, warming to it now, "with someone who actually sees me. Someone who doesn't make me feel like a footnote in his own life." Then she laughed, not nervous, victorious, a woman who believed she just detonated something and was standing safely outside the blast radius. I knew 3 things she didn't. I knew Clifton had an independent divorce petition sitting ready to file the second I gave the word. I knew the deed on that condo had both our names on it, which meant her signature on that purchase agreement was worth exactly nothing. And I knew that somewhere, likely already outside the state of Texas, a man named Tanner Holcomb had stopped answering his phone. So I said the only 2 words that made any sense to say. "Sounds good." The silence on her end lasted just long enough for me to picture her face doing something complicated. "Sounds good," she repeated, like the phrase had come out wrong the first time and she was giving me a chance to fix it. "Yeah," I said, "I'll see you when I get back." I hung up. I stood there in that lobby a moment longer, phone still warm in my hand, and let myself feel exactly what I'd earned the right to feel. Not triumph, not yet, just the quiet satisfaction of a man who'd built something strong enough to hold. Then I called Clifton. She filed, I said. Signed the purchase agreement too. Understood, he said, and I could hear him already moving, already reaching for something on his desk. Give me an hour. I drove back to Dallas that afternoon, 4 hours on I-45 with the phone propped in the console and Clifton's voice coming through it in pieces. Updates arriving the way returns come in on election night, small, then decisive. I checked the county clerk's records, he said, somewhere around the 2-hour mark. Her attorney filed the paperwork this morning. It hasn't been served yet. How much time does that give us? Enough. I'm filing an independent petition right now. Not a response to hers, ours. Standing on its own. A pause, keys clicking somewhere on his end. Filed. 9 minutes ago. I felt something in my chest loosen slightly, the way it does when a deal you've been sweating for weeks finally clears its last contingency. And the condo? Already reached out to Dr. Owusu. She's drafting a letter to Isolda's attorney today explaining the ownership issue. The purchase agreement isn't worth the paper it's printed on without your signature. There is no sale. Somewhere past Corsicana, with the highway opening up flat and gold in front of me, Clifton gave me the last piece. Craig sent an update last night. $23,000 moved out of the shared business account, Isolda's and Tanner's. Craig couldn't trace where it went before the trail went cold. And his phone's been dark for 48 hours. I didn't say anything for a moment. Outside the window, the land rolled by the way it does on that stretch of highway, flat and indifferent. The kind of scenery that doesn't care what you're carrying inside the car with you. She doesn't know yet, I said. It wasn't a question. No, Clifton said. She doesn't know any of it yet. By the time I crossed into Dallas County, the sun was dropping low over the skyline, and everything Clifton and I had spent 3 months building was finally standing on its own. The petition was filed, the condo was locked, and somewhere out there, Isolda was about to discover, piece by piece, exactly how much of the last 3 months hadn't gone the way she thought it had. I wasn't driving toward a confrontation. I was driving toward the moment the floor she thought she was standing on finally showed her the truth about what was underneath it. I heard her before I even opened the door. Her voice, through the wood, high and tight, pushing out words at a pace that didn't match the woman I'd married. I stood in the hallway a moment with my key in the lock, listening to the particular sound anxiety makes when it's still trying to disguise itself as control. I let the door open slowly. She was at the kitchen counter, still in yesterday's clothes, her auburn hair loose and unraveling in a way that told me she hadn't touched it since morning. Her laptop sat open in front of her, throwing pale light up across her face, a banking portal filling the screen. When she looked up and saw me standing there, something moved across her expression that I know I'll carry for the rest of my life. Not the look of a woman who'd won. The look of a woman who just glanced down and found no floor beneath her feet. Raymond, she set her phone down carefully, like it might go off. I didn't expect you until tonight. Drove back early. I set my bag by the door. What's going on? She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at the laptop, then back at me. Tanner's not answering my calls. I walked past her to the kitchen and poured a glass of water from the filter. The one she'd picked out years ago, the one that matched the countertops she'd deliberated over for an entire weekend. I took my time drinking it. That's unfortunate, I said. She stared at me, really stared, the way you look at someone when a suspicion you haven't let yourself name is starting to take shape behind your eyes. Do you know something? Why would I know something about Tanner Holcomb? She looked back at the screen. The business account, the one Tanner and I share for the firm. The money's gone, $23,000. I can't reach him, and the buyer for the condo is saying the purchase agreement might not even be. She stopped. I watched her do the arithmetic in real time. Watched the pieces she'd been holding separately in her mind slide toward each other and click into a shape she didn't want to see. Because your name's on the deed, she said quietly. That's correct. I set the glass down. Community property. Can't be sold without both signatures. Her hands went flat on the counter. Very still. You have an attorney. I've had one for 3 months. The silence that followed didn't sound like any silence we'd shared in 12 years of marriage. It had weight to it. It was the silence of someone realizing the game they thought they were playing had, in fact, been playing them the entire time. You knew, she said. Since February. She looked down at the phone on the counter. The one I could see, from where I stood. She'd tried calling Tanner 17 times in the last 2 hours. He's not coming, Isolda. I said it evenly, not cruel, not triumphant. I'd been angry for months, in private, in my car, on long drives across North Texas that had become the real geography of that year. But standing in that kitchen, I was already on the far side of the anger. What was left was something quieter. Craig Bethel, the investigator I hired, found his history. Nashville, Phoenix, Atlanta. He does this. Finds women with businesses, with assets. Builds trust. Moves money. Disappears. This is at least the third time. She didn't move. The $23,000 is likely gone. You may want to file a police report. Given that he's probably already left the state, recovery's going to be difficult. You're telling me to call the police? Her voice had dropped to almost nothing. I'm telling you what your options are. I'm not your enemy. I never was. But I'm not going to pretend the last several months didn't happen, and I'm not going to let myself be destroyed by choices I wasn't part of. She lowered herself onto one of the kitchen stools, the one she'd spent 40 minutes choosing at a shop in the design district, back when choosing stools was the biggest decision either of us had to make in a day. I'd stood there patiently that afternoon, happy to let her have exactly what she wanted. It struck me, watching her sit there now, how much had changed since then, and how little the stool itself had. How long, she finally said, have you been planning this? Planning what? Protecting myself, since February. Filing. Clifton filed this morning. Her head came up. You filed first. Yes. She put both hands over her face. Sat there a long moment. When she lowered them, she looked exhausted in a way sleep wasn't going to fix. Tanner told me you were hiding money, she said. Offshore accounts. That you were going to leave me with nothing. I looked at her carefully. 17 years of reading term sheets teaches you exactly what a lie built for a purpose looks like once you know where to look. He needed you to think I was the threat, I said. Because if you were watching me, you weren't watching him. She stared down at the counter. The business account. He suggested it, said we needed to keep the partnership finances separate from mine. I thought it was professional. Organized. It was organized, I said. That's exactly how it works. I want to be honest about something. There is a particular kind of grief that comes not just from losing someone, but from realizing your own trust was the mechanism used against you. I've watched it happen in negotiations gone wrong. I watched it happen to my wife, in the kitchen we'd shared for 9 years, on an ordinary Thursday evening. I'm not going to tell you I felt nothing standing there. I had loved this woman. I'd meant every word I said to her on a rooftop overlooking the Dallas skyline. But I'd also spent 3 months watching the truth arrive in quiet pieces, and somewhere in those months, most of the grieving had already happened, in private, where it belonged. What was left in that kitchen wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. What happens now? She asked. Clifton will be in touch with your attorney. The accounting's clean, separate property, community property, all documented. The condo gets sold properly, with both signatures, or bought out at fair value. I picked my bag back up from beside the door. I'm staying at the Crescent tonight. Take some time, make your calls. Raymond. She said my name the way she used to say it, years ago, something underneath the word that had nothing to do with the syllables themselves. I'm sorry. I stood at the door a moment. I know you are, I said. It doesn't fix anything, but I know you are. And I left her there, under the kitchen light, the laptop still glowing beside her, the door closing behind me on 12 years in a way that made almost no sound at all. The divorce took 11 months. It was never the catastrophe Isolde had once imagined she was walking into, because by the time her attorney got a good look at the paperwork, there was no catastrophe left to build. Every account was clean. Every asset had a paper trail stretching back to before we ever met or clearly built together since. Clifton Hale had done exactly what he does, made sure the thing I'd built with my own hands stayed mine. Under Texas law, community property gets divided fairly, and that's what happened. We sold the Turtle Creek condo and split what it was actually worth. Isolde kept her design firm, what was left of it, minus the $23,000 Tanner had taken with him, minus the debt she'd quietly accrued during the months she thought she was building a new life instead of watching an old one dissolve out from under her. Tanner Holcomb didn't get far. 4 months after he left Dallas, he surfaced in Denver, already circling a new woman, already running the same play, a boutique hotel owner this time, a fresh set of shared accounts, a fresh set of promises. But federal investigators had been building a wire fraud case against him for 2 years by then, quietly, the way real cases get built, and between that agent's work and the 2 women in Phoenix and Nashville who'd never stopped pursuing their civil suits, they finally had enough to bring him into a federal courtroom on 7 counts. I gave a statement. It wasn't dramatic, just facts, laid out the way I'd laid out everything for Clifton over those 3 months, dates, patterns, documentation. He's serving 6 years now, at a federal facility in Colorado. Isolde testified too. We sat in the same courthouse hallway for 40 minutes without speaking, the 2 of us, waiting to be called. It wasn't comfortable, I don't think it was supposed to be. But when she took the stand, she was composed. Thorough. She told the truth, all of it, without flinching and without trying to make herself look better in the telling. I respected that. Whatever she'd been during the worst year of our marriage, she still had enough left in her to do that one thing right. I think about the morning after that phone call in Houston more than I expected to. I sat in my car in that parking garage for almost 10 minutes before I went back inside, not to fall apart. I'd already done that privately, in pieces, over the previous months. I sat there because I needed to be honest with myself about what I was actually feeling before I let myself say those two words and mean them. I want to be clear about something, because it matters more than the ending of this story. I didn't win anything that day. There's no winning in watching something you built with real love come apart. There's only a choice about how you walk through it, whether you're the person who reacts and loses everything in the reacting, or the person who absorbs the blow and keeps thinking 2 steps ahead until the ground is solid again. My father spent 31 years hauling freight before his back finally gave out on him. He never once used the word strategy in his life. But he used to tell me the loudest man in any room is almost never the one who's actually prepared. I used to think he was talking about negotiating tables. I understand now he was talking about everything. Today, Caulfield Property Group has 15 agents. Last spring we opened a second office in Fort Worth, on Camp Bowie Boulevard, glass front. Our name across the top in letters I designed myself. My father drove up from Mesquite for the opening. He didn't say much, he never does when something means something to him. He just stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, looking at the space for a long, quiet minute, the way a man looks at something he helped build without ever laying a single brick. That was enough. It always has been. I'm not going to tell you everything worked out perfectly, or that the hard part is fully behind me, or that loss like that resolves itself into something clean and finished. It doesn't. Real life never does. But I'll tell you this. Those 2 words I said in that Houston lobby, the ones that sounded, to everyone listening, like a man quietly surrendering, were actually the moment I'd already finished winning the only fight that mattered. Not against Isolde, against the version of myself that might have reacted, might have burned everything down in one furious phone call, might have handed away everything I'd spent 17 years building in exchange for 10 minutes of feeling justified. She called that day expecting to find debris. What she found instead was a man who'd already cleared the site, quietly, patiently, 3 months in advance, and was standing there, calm as anything, already thinking about what he was going to build next. Sounds good. I still don't regret it. Not for a second.